Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Happy Hanukkah. Almost. Okay, we've got about 3 weeks, right? Very thrilled to be here. Very excited to be here. Get to know you fine folks. Gabriel has spoken very highly of you, and I got a little sampling of that last night. Teaching in the home of Miss Mary Jane. I don't know if she's here this morning. But anyway, I had a good time with folks there, and we're going to have a great time today. So I'm very thankful to be here. Just a quick word. He's told a little bit about me. I'll tell one other thing. Can everybody hear me, and do I need to get on a mic? Okay. Let me grab a mic here.
Do this. I'm going to have you scoot over this.
Okay, that's fine. I'll pull these back here.
Okay. I want you to strain your voice all day.
Tech supports committee.
Let's go over this way.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, good to be here, and I'm excited to meet all of you. I want to meet all of you. I met a good dozen or more people last night, and I love meeting people. We are a family that is native Arkansans. We have been native Arkansans. My wife and I grew up in Arkansas. We raised our kids in Arkansas, and we moved to Macon, Georgia, just 2.5 years ago. The Lord called us there to integrate into a community similar to this. We joined a Messianic synagogue. I came on staff part-time there. I do work on my own outside of the home, outside of the ministry. I also have my own ministry called Emet HaTorah, and it's a teaching ministry, and I publish books and have a lot of online articles and speak and things like that. And so I'm sort of dual representation here between Nachum Ami and Emet HaTorah, and so I'm very thankful to be here. So our topic today is Hanukkah. And before I get started, I want to say one thing. I'm very sad that my family is not with me. I'm very happy that at least my son Kai is with me. And I've got 4 kids that are getting over the chicken pox. So, yeah. So that's why they're not here. But anyway, they're on the tail end of things. One of them was just lagging behind and been difficult for him to travel. So we're thankful that that's over. So anyway, we're going to be talking about Hanukkah today, and just out of curiosity, who in the room has celebrated Hanukkah before? Okay, pretty good number here. This session, we're going to have 3 sessions today, as Gabriel talked about, and these sessions are going to cover different aspects of it. The first one, you may have seen the announcement, but the first session we're going to talk about right now is basically the history of Hanukkah, and I'm calling this the true miracle of Hanukkah, because what was the true miracle, and what does it commemorate? And there's some discrepancy in that, and recorded in different sources. And so what is that true miracle, and how can we relate to that? The second section, we're going to be talking about disciples of Yeshua and their relationship to Hanukkah, and Yeshua's relationship to Hanukkah. Okay, we're going to look at some of his teachings, his life, and things like that, and see what has to do with us and that thing. The third session is we're going to do more of how to. We're going to say, hey, how do we really get into Hanukkah? How do we do this? And what are the practical things and the pragmatics and stuff like that, and that kind of thing. And we're going to have a Q&A session as well. So this first session, Gabriel said we're running until 3? Is that what you said for this first session? Just joking. Well, first of all, before I start, I want to get one thing clear. Hanukkah is not the Jewish Christmas. Okay? It unfortunately has suffered some of this same commercialization as that in recent years. But it has nothing to do with competing with Christmas and being on that nature. It celebrates something wonderful that happened many, many years ago, and we're going to discuss that this morning. So let me start by asking a question. Do you believe in miracles? The chorus of a popular Hanukkah song asks this same question. Why? Because Hanukkah is a remembrance and a celebration of miracles. They are miracles that were done on behalf of the Jewish nation more than 2,000 years ago. But what are these miracles? That's what we're going to talk about today. What are these miracles? And why do we celebrate them year after year after year, even 2,000 years later, right? Most people think of the miracle of Hanukkah as the oil in the Holy Temple miraculously lasting these 8 days of Hanukkah. But this miracle isn't ever mentioned in the books of Maccabees. Okay? It's only mentioned in the Talmud. Is this miracle a rabbinic fabrication created to distract from the true miracles of Hanukkah? Let's embark on a journey to find out whether this is the case or not. Okay? So I'm going to begin this, and I just have to preface this. This first session, it'll be good for some people. It may not be as good for others people, because this is going to be primarily a history lesson that we're going to have to sort of wade through. Now, I could have spent all 3 sessions just on this part, because there's so much. And if you want to get into that, go online and start reading about that. Read the book of 1 Maccabees, 2 Maccabees. Read the book of Daniel, because that's very applicable, and you can just see all the parallels. And I'll hit on a little bit of that, but I've avoided a lot of stuff, taken out a lot of stuff to try to condense as much as possible to get the overall gist of where we're headed, okay? And give you guys an overview. But I'm going to start the story of Hanukkah almost 200 years before Hanukkah actually happened, okay? Before the events of Hanukkah took place. Somewhere around July 20th or 21st in the year 356 BCE, a Greek boy was born in the city of Pella, the capital city of the Macedonian kingdom of Greece. Okay? He was born to the Macedonian king Philip II. This boy was tutored by somebody you may have heard of. His name was Aristotle. Okay? Pretty popular guy. He was tutored by Aristotle until the age of 16, and he would grow up to be a fierce warrior and an unprecedented military commander. When his father was assassinated in 336 BCE, he ascended his father's throne at the age of 20 years old. Okay, can you imagine being king over a kingdom of 20? In just over a decade, he would expand his kingdom to conquer more territories than almost anyone in history. Okay, his kingdom began in Greece in the west and continued through Asia, reaching as far as the northwestern corners or coast of India in the east, and extended south as far as Egypt. He created one of the largest empires of the ancient world, but died at an early age of only 33. Anybody following who this guy is? Picking up? Okay. This man's name, who is this guy? This was Alexander the Great. Okay. So why is he important to the story of Hanukkah? What does he have to do with the story of Hanukkah? Let's find out. During Alexander's conquest across the ancient world, he conquered the land of Israel. You may have heard of that too. He originally planned to decimate Jerusalem, but according to Josephus, everybody's heard of Josephus, right? Okay, historian, 1st century, 2nd century. Alexander was shown the book of Daniel when he entered Jerusalem, which described a mighty Greek king who would conquer the Persian Empire, which he had just done. Okay? He evidently spared the city because he had some kind of regard for the people from whom this prophecy had come. It's like, whoa, this people knows my past and my future. Okay? And so, I had to rearrange some of my notes here, so let me go to here just a second here. So we have this story of why Alexander spared Jerusalem. We also have another discrepancy with the Talmud of why Alexander spared Jerusalem. It tells a slightly different story. According to this account, when Alexander came to Jerusalem, he was greeted by the high priest Shimon HaTzadik. You may have heard him, Simon or Simeon the Righteous. Okay? He was greeted by him. And what transpired is as follows. This is, if you want to look this up at some point, it's in Tractate Yoma 69a. It says, the 25th of Tevet is known as the day of Mount Gerizim. Now, Tevet is one of the Hebrew months on the Hebrew calendars. We can go through that, but just for those of you who may not be familiar, it's a month on the Hebrew calendar. The 25th of Tevet is known as the day of Mount Gerizim, which was established as a joyful day, and therefore eulogizing is not permitted. What occurred on that day, it asks? It was on that day that the Samaritans requested the house of the Lord from Alexander the Macedonian in order to destroy it. In other words, they wanted the temple in Jerusalem destroyed because the Samaritans were always in competition with the Jews, and they wanted it, they had it in for them. Okay? And so they conspired with Alexander to help him take over the temple and destroy it. And he gave it to them. In other words, he gave them permission to destroy it. And the people came and informed the high priest, Shimon HaTzadik, of what had transpired. And what did he do? He donned the priestly vestments. He wrapped himself in the priestly vestments. And the nobles of the Jewish people were with him, with torches of fire in their hands. And all that night, these, the representatives of the Jewish people, approached from this side, and those, the armies of Alexander and the Samaritans, from the other side, until dawn, when they finally saw one another. When dawn arrived, Alexander said to the Samaritans, pardon me, "Who are these people coming to meet us?" They said to him, "These are the Jews who rebelled against you." When he reached what would later be called Antipatris, the sun shone and the two camps met each other. When Alexander saw Shimon HaTzadik, this is the exciting part, this is the really almost spooky part, he descended from his chariot and bowed before him. Alexander bowed before Shimon. Okay? His escorts said to him, "Should an important king such as you bow to this lowly Jew?" He said to them, "I do so because the image of this man's face is victorious for me on the battlefield. And therefore I know that he has supreme sanctity." In other words, he said, "I see this man every time I go out to battle. I see his face going before me into battle." Okay? And so this is the story that's told here. And there's also another story that tells why, especially in the priestly lineage, there's many men named Alexander, because they told Alexander if he would spare the city, they would honor him by naming their sons Alexander in honor of him. Okay? Although Jerusalem was spared, Israel became a vassal state to Alexander's empire for the next 150 plus years. But when Alexander died, he had no clear heir to the throne. Okay, he only had an infant as his heir that couldn't rule. And so when he was asked who should succeed him on his deathbed, he's believed to have said the words, "the strongest." Okay? The strongest should succeed him. Which led his empire into a division between his four generals: Cassander, Ptolemy, Antigonus, and Seleucus. These four guys were known as the Diadochi, or Diadachi. I'm not sure how you pronounce that exactly, but it means successors in Greek. Therefore, civil war broke out among his generals and only ended once the kingdom had been divided among the four generals into four main regions. These regions are the Ptolemaic region, which is basically down in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire, this is the one we're going to focus on, in Syria, Mesopotamia, and Persia, the Antigonid kingdom of Macedonia and Greece, and the Attalid kingdom of Pergamon. Okay? And so all of this was prophesied, though, by the prophet Daniel, as I was talking earlier. Okay? So the story of this taking place happens in the book of Daniel. We can read through Daniel. We can read, first of all, in Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, right? He has a dream of the image of the statue, of the idol, and it's made of all these different metals, right? And this is the progression of kingdoms and the overthrow of one kingdom to the next. And this is exactly what happened. And Alexander was the third of those four kingdoms, okay? So we have in Daniel chapter 2, verses 32 and 33, this passage. The head of this image was of fine gold. Its chest and arms of silver. Its middle and thighs of bronze. Its legs of iron. Its feet partially of iron and partly of clay. Daniel interprets the king's dream as various kingdoms that will be world powers beginning with the Babylonian Empire. And we're not talking about the whole world at this time. We're talking about kingdoms that will directly affect Israel. Okay? The symbolism of the image is broke down as follows. We have the head of gold representing the Babylonian Empire. We have the arms and the chest of silver representing the Medo-Persian Empire. We have the thighs of bronze representing the Greek Empire, which right now we're talking about in Alexander the Great. Okay, this is his kingdom, his empire. And then we have the kingdom that would follow was the legs of iron and the feet of clay. This would be the Roman Empire. Daniel 11 foretells the entire series of events from before Alexander the Great until the time of the Maccabees. Okay, if you want to check that out. Daniel 11 through 11:1 through right somewhere around 11:35. Daniel 8 is also important though because it sets the stage for the awful events that would one day take place during the time of the Maccabees. Okay? So now, the kingdom of Alexander has been divided. After his death and division of the kingdoms, Israel comes under the rulership of the Ptolemaic kingdom. Remember, that's down in Egypt. So Israel comes under their rule first. But because they're pretty much in the middle of these kingdoms, the Ptolemaic and the Seleucid kingdoms, they're right in the middle of conflict. Because these leaders of these kingdoms, they want to conquer as much territory and reclaim Alexander's kingdom and unite it as a whole. And they begin fighting and all this kind of stuff and trying to regain territory. And so Israel gets caught right in the middle of these things. Israel fell prey to attacks from the various kings wanting to extend their power over the other. The territory of Israel traded hands multiple times. So Antiochus III was one of the rulers of the Seleucid kingdom. And although he didn't have any affection for Israel, he didn't really have any, particular animosity either. They were just another kingdom that he ruled over. And he pretty much left them alone, okay? But after his death, things changed drastically, as you might know already. And through a series of events, his son, who later became known as Antiochus IV, he was originally named Mithridates, but he assumed the name Antiochus after he ascended the throne. He... Trying to make me like Yeshua, aren't you? You sat down to teach them? Thank you. He... I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so he ascended the throne, and he was known as, he gave himself the title Antiochus Epiphanes. Have you guys heard that? Yeah. Okay? And so Epiphanes basically God incarnate. Okay? But he was so crazy, he was so just impetuous and so irrational that he was given the title, even by his own people, of Antiochus Epiphanes, which means mad one. Okay? He came to power when he dethroned his brother Seleucus' assassin. Okay? His brother was assassinated, and this person assumed leadership. I forget who that was. And Antiochus pulled him off the throne, and he became the sole monarch. Actually, he became a co-regent with his nephew, who was only a child at the time, maybe a small infant even, and he had him assassinated a few years later. He murdered him, okay, so he could become the sole heir to the throne. And so he took the throne of the Seleucid kingdom, and things were never the same. In the year 168 BCE, Antiochus attacked Egypt, so he's going down to try to regain the Ptolemaic kingdom and expand his empire, but was blocked by the Romans, who were increasingly becoming more and more powerful at this time, and they were imposing on these kingdoms and trying to keep order in things. He was forced to withdraw to his own land, and he humiliated and enraged by his defeat, Antiochus headed back home. But on his way home, where did he have to pass through? Israel. Okay? He received word on his way home of what appeared to be a Jewish revolt happening, and an uprising in Judea. And he stopped in to quell the rebellion, okay? And he unleashed his full wrath on Jerusalem. Here are a couple of passages from 2nd Maccabees and 1st Maccabees, in that order, that describe these events. When these happenings were reported to the king, he thought that Judea was in revolt. Raging like a wild animal, he set out from Egypt and took Jerusalem by storm. He ordered his soldiers to cut down without mercy those whom they met, and to slay those who took refuge in their houses. There was a massacre of young and old alike, a killing of women and children, a slaughter of virgins and infants. In the space of 3 days, 80,000 were lost, 40,000 meeting a violent death, and 40,000 sold into slavery. Okay? That's from 2nd Maccabees. 1st Maccabees records this about it. After Antiochus had ravaged Egypt in the 143rd year, he returned and went up against Israel. He went up to Jerusalem with a great multitude. He proudly entered into the sanctuary and took away the golden altar and the candlestick of light and all the vessels thereof, and the table of proposition, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the little mortars of gold, and the veils, and the crowns, and the golden ornament that was before the temple, and he broke them all in pieces. He took the silver and gold and precious vessels, and he took the hidden treasures which he found, and when he had taken all away, he departed into his own country. And he made a slaughter of men, and spoke very proudly. And there were great mourning in Israel, and every place where they were. Okay? So he just goes in slaughters indiscriminately, just saying, I'm the boss, and you're going to know it. 2 years later, he returns to Jerusalem, pretending to come in peace. He says, hey, everything's okay, everything's cool. I'm gonna take care of you. Just open your gate, let me in, we're going to have this conversation. Once the gate was open, he again continued to slaughter the people of Jerusalem, the Jewish people at will. At that point, the Jewish people decided they couldn't take it, and they began to fight back on a very serious level. They began very serious about resisting and so forth. That made Antiochus determined that the Jewish nation should no longer have special privileges as they had in the past, but should assimilate and become one with this Hellenistic culture and religion. Judaism would no longer be tolerated on any level. Okay? Well, I'm going to read another passage from 1st Maccabees. This is, and King Antiochus wrote to all his kingdom that the people should be one, and everyone should leave his own law. And all nations consented according to the word of King Antiochus. And many of Israel consented to his service, and they sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. Okay, so we have these Jewish people, these people of Israel that are bound to the covenant, forsaking this because their lives are being threatened. The king sent letters by the hands of messengers to Jerusalem and to all the cities of Judea that they should follow the law of the nations of the earth and should forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and atonements to be made in the temple of God, and should prohibit the Sabbath and the festival days to be celebrated. And he commanded the holy places to be profaned and the holy people of Israel. He commanded altars and temples and idols to be built, and swine's flesh and unclean beast to be sacrificed. And that they should leave their children uncircumcised, and let their souls be defiled with all uncleanness and abominations, to the end that they should forget the Torah and should change all the ordinances of God. and that whosoever would not do according to the word of King Antiochus should be put to death. Okay? This is the seriousness of what's going on. So on the 15th day of the month of Kislev, that is I think that's the 9th month, it's either 9th or 10th, the temple got a UPS package from King Antiochus in love, right? Got an idol. They received an idol to be set up in the Holy Temple. And it was not only set up in the temple, it was set upon the holy altar. And on the 25th of Kislev, date which may be familiar to you, the altar was defiled and an idolatrous sacrifice began to be offered on the holy altar. Antiochus began an assimilation campaign throughout Judea, going to respectable members of each community and getting them to compromise their religious convictions by offering up a sacrifice to an idol and eating the flesh of swine publicly. This is how you do it, right? If you want people to follow, you influence the leadership. You influence the influencers. And this is exactly what he did. Well, they eventually came to the town of Modin, where the high priest Mattatyahu, you may have heard of him, or Matthias, his Greek name, and his 5 sons lived. They compelled Mattatyahu to do as Antiochus had directed. They wanted him to fulfill this, and he wanted him to set an example of him. But he staunchly refused. However, another Jewish man spoke up to take his place and began to head toward the altar to make the sacrifice. Okay? Now, I want to pause for just a second and insert something here. So, unfortunately, during this period, there were many Jewish people who had become Hellenized through proxy. Okay? They had rubbed shoulders with the Greek culture long enough where they wanted to be like them. Okay? It's very difficult to be different from the people around you, isn't it, sometimes? They wanted to exchange their Jewish faith for paganism because that was the going thing. They wanted to fit in with the rest of the world. They were tired of being different. They were tired of sticking out like a sore thumb. They were tired of not being able to compete in the games and the gymnasiums that were done in the nude. And they would obviously recognize that they are circumcised when their competitors are not. They were tired of having their diets restricted when their pagan neighbors could eat anything and everything they wanted. They were tired of saying, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." They were tired of being the odd man out. Their lights had flickered, and rather than resisting the howling winds of change, they had succumbed to the darkness. I'm sure we all have stories of people who have been in that place and given up. We've probably thought about it ourselves from time to time. But I want to tell you today, the light is worth preserving. Amen. And the fight is worth fighting. Okay? And that's what we're learning about today. This is what Hanukkah is all about. And so at this point, Mattatyahu, he rose up with zeal for the Lord and for the Torah. And he ended up slaughtering the man who was going to offer the sacrifice. And he also slaughtered the officer who was overseeing the activities and the charge of the public event. I'm going to read another section here from Maccabees that describes some of this. And Mattatyahu, after this event, it says, "And Mattatyahu cried out in the city with a loud voice, saying, 'Everyone that has zeal for the Torah and maintains the testament, let him follow me.' So he and his sons fled to the mountains and left all that they had in the city. Then many sought after judgment and justice and went down into the desert, and they abode there, they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because afflictions increased upon them." So they had started something that's causing problems. It stirred up the hornet's nest, and it was about to hit the fan, okay? But after this happened, what would they do? What were the rest of the Israelites who wanted to follow the Torah, who wanted to be faithful to the Lord? What were they to do? Okay? Were they to fight back? Yeah, they did. But there became a problem. There became a halakhic issue. Okay? Does everybody know what I mean by halakhic or halakha? It's a legal issue. Okay? And so the issue was, what happens when they attack us on the Sabbath? Do we have the right to fight back? Or is that a violation of the Sabbath? And they chose to not fight, to uphold the Sabbath rather than fight back. And they would rather lose their lives than to desecrate the Shabbat. And so they were slaughtered. So the men of Antiochus took advantage of this and just began wiping them out, one by one by one. On the Sabbath, because they knew they would not fight. Okay? So the Maccabees established a new halakha, a new ruling. It says that self-preservation on the Sabbaths and the festivals is greater than maintaining the sanctity of Shabbat, because the sanctity of life outweighs the sanctity of Shabbat. Sounds a lot like what our Master said, right?
Yes.
Okay? And so they base this on the two passages, one from Leviticus and one where Ezekiel quotes it. But Leviticus 18:5, this is the passage they based it on. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. Okay? And so Ezekiel has a similar take on this. He says, I gave them, this quoting Hashem, quoting the Lord, I gave them my statutes and made known to them my rules, by which if a person does them, he shall live. And so their understanding of this became, God gave us the commandments to live by, not to die by. Okay? And if we die, there will be no one to live these commandments. And so we have to preserve lives in order to obey God. Okay? So Judah Maccabee, the warrior type son, the military leader of Mattityahu's 5 sons, he begins guerrilla warfare against the Syrian troops at all odds. Okay? He prays before battle, following the Torah's instructions to release those with obligations or fear from the battle. You guys remember that from the Torah?
Yes.
Okay? And so this is what he says. I love this. So here's the predicament. The commander Lysias comes against him with 40,000 men and 7,000 horsemen. Okay? And he's going to come in and just decimate these guys. But Judah speaks up, and what do? They fasted. So they fasted that day and put on haircloth or sackcloth. They put ashes upon their heads. They rent their garments, and they laid open the books of Torah, in which the Gentiles searched for the likeness of their idols. They brought the priestly garments, the first fruit tithes. They stirred up the Nazarites that had fulfilled their days. They cried out with a loud voice toward heaven, saying, what shall we do with these, and where shall we carry them? For your holies are trodden down. In other words, we don't have a place to fulfill the vows that we've made. This holy temple is forsaken. There's nothing there. Your holies are trodden down and profane. Your priests are mourning and brought low. And behold, the nations are come together against us to destroy us. You know what they intend against us. How shall we be able to stand before their face unless you, O God, help us? They sounded with trumpets and they cried with a loud voice. Okay? The Lord aids them in victory over their enemies, time after time after time again. The odds are completely against them. Completely. If you want to read this, it's just amazing. Some of you young adults who are in here, if you haven't read 1 Maccabees especially, and you like stuff like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, I mean, that's the first thing my kids, when we read it a few years back, they were like, whoa, that's like Lord of the Rings type stuff, you know. You got elephants in the armies and, you know, all that kind of stuff going. You have troops and military strategies and all that kind of stuff. And so it's really fascinating. And so time after time, this little band of warriors, God gives them the grace, gives them the knowledge, gives them the wisdom, gives them the strength and the courage to face their enemies over and over and over again. And the hand of the Lord prevails.
Sounds familiar.
It does. That's right. Okay? And so, eventually Judah's men enter Jerusalem and they begin to restore the Holy Temple. They tear down the idols. They take apart the desecrated altar. There's a whole story involved with that, about taking it apart, hiding it away. And exactly 3 years to the date after the desecration of the altar, they once again rededicate the altar to the Lord. To the date, on the 25th of Kislev, it became the first day of Hanukkah, the first day of dedication, because that's what the word Hanukkah means. It means dedication. They proclaimed that they should have had 8 days of consecration. Again, First Maccabees. Let me pick a place in the middle here. They made new holy vessels and brought in the candlestick, the altar of incense, and the table into the temple. They put incense on the altar and lighted up the lamps that were upon the candlestick. And they gave light in the temple. And they set the loaves upon the table and hung up the veils and finished all the works that they had begun to make. And they arose before the morning on the 25th day of the 9th month. The 9th month, that's what month it is, which is in the month of Kislev in the 148th year. And they offered sacrifice according to the Torah upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made, according to the time and according to the day wherein the heathens had defiled it. In the same was it dedicated anew, with canticles and harps and lutes and cymbals. And all the people fell upon their faces and adored and blessed up to heaven him that had prospered them. They gave thanks to God. And they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days. And they offered burnt offerings with joy and sacrifices of salvation and of praise. They adorned the front of the temple with crowns of gold and usteitions, which I don't know what that word is. And they renewed the gates and the chambers and hung doors upon them. And they were exceedingly great. There was exceedingly great joy among the people, and the reproach of the Gentiles was turned away. And Judah and his brethren and all the congregation of Israel decreed that the day of the dedication of the altar should be kept in its season from year to year for 8 days, from the 25th day of the month of Kislev, with joy and gladness. They built up also at that time Mount Zion, with walls and strong towers about, lest the Gentiles should at any time come and tread it down as they did before. And he placed a garrison there to keep it, and he fortified it to secure Bethsula, that the people might have a defense against Idumea. Now, a couple of things here. One, we have to realize that it sounds like the story is over, right? That's not over at all. There's years of battles that continue, okay? That they have to continue protection. They have to continue forcing these guys out. They have to continue relying on the Lord, even though they've rededicated the temple's now functioning. Okay. The second is something I failed to mention earlier. This is how awful Antiochus treated the people and the extent of what he desired. He desired so much that the religion of Judaism would just go away, that he committed atrocious acts. Okay? It says, now the women that circumcised their children were slain according to the commandment of King Antiochus. And they hanged the children about their necks in their house. and those that had circumcised them were put to death. Many of the people of Israel determined within themselves that they would not eat unclean things, and they chose rather to die than to be defiled with unclean meats. They would not break the holy covenant of God, and they were put to death. And there was very great wrath upon the people. Okay? So that's the just awful things that this wicked, wicked king did. So, in this, there is a connection in their celebration that we didn't read. Let me just read a passage from 2 Maccabees of how they did this 8-day celebration. They had been wandering in the mountains and caves like wild animals. So what is the Festival of Booths? What are we? Sukkot. Okay, you've heard Sukkot, Tabernacles, Booths. It's all the same thing. It's this 7-day festival with Shmini Atzeret at the end that is dedicated to the Lord to remember the wandering in the wilderness and so forth. Okay?
Season of joy.
Season of our joy. That's exactly right. Okay, and then it continues on with the description of this. It says, therefore, carrying ivy-wreathed wands and beautiful branches and also fronds of palm. What does that sound like? It sounds like it sounds like the lulavs we wave at Sukkot, right?
Yeah.
They offered hymns of thanksgiving to him who had given success to the purifying of his own holy place. They decreed by public edict, ratified by vote, that the whole nation of the Jews should observe these days every year. So in this we have a connection to Sukkot because they're doing this 8-day feast. One of the reasons why they're doing it 8 days in the dedication and consecration is because they weren't able to celebrate Sukkot previously. Okay? And so anytime you think about Hanukkah too, there's a connection to Sukkot. There's a lot more that we could go into. We don't have time for that this morning. But I wanted to get that in there so you could see little elements that are connected here. Okay? So here's the deal. I have a question for you. Now that you know pretty much the story of Hanukkah, my question is, if the miracle of Hanukkah was the victory of God's people over their overpowering foreign oppressors, the few over the many, then why does the Talmud hardly mention the military victory, but says that the reason Hanukkah is celebrated revolves around an event not recorded in either of the books of Maccabees, nor by Josephus? What's that?
Their enemies were still around.
Yeah, that's right. Their enemies were still around. Okay? Here's what the Talmud says about why Hanukkah is celebrated. Okay, let me just read this. This is from Tractate Shabbat 21b. What is Hanukkah and why are lights kindled on Hanukkah? It answers its own question. The sages taught in another tractate Megillah, on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. One may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them. What is the reason? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy came and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil to light the menorah for only 1 day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the menorah, and it burned 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays with recitation of the Hallel and special thanksgiving prayers and blessings. Okay, this is what the Talmud says. So this is a rhetorical question at this point. But this part is this some kind of Jewish conspiracy to cover up the miracle of the Maccabean leadership and God's deliverance of his people? No. Okay? And the reason goes back to our passage in Genesis 1, which I haven't introduced. But in the beginning, what was the first thing God created? Light. And somehow, I think I skipped a page. But at the very beginning, he says, we're going to talk about this more second session. He says, Yehi Or. Okay? Let there be light. The first thing God spoke into existence was light. It was also the very first thing that he called what?
Good.
Good. Right? The light penetrated the darkness. And from that point forward, the darkness has worked and striven to overcome it. The Syrians didn't have a problem with the Jewish people maintaining their culture. It's like, this is just another culture, no big deal, right? They had a major problem with them maintaining their spirituality or their spiritual status. They had a huge problem with that. The light of the Torah exposed the darkness of paganism. Remember Paul saying, without the Torah I would not know what sin is. Okay? Because it defines the parameters of sin. And when people find out what those parameters are, they either have one of two responses. Oh, I'm glad I know now. I need to fix that. Or the most likely answer is, how dare you judge me? Right? The miracle of the oil, therefore, tells us precisely how the light of Judaism overcame the darkness of paganism in the days of Maccabees. It wasn't by might. It wasn't by power. But it was by the Spirit of the Lord. Just as the Lord told Zerubbabel when he was building the second temple. Zechariah 4:6 says, "This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts." And this was his predicament as well. He was rebuilding this temple with enemies around him. Right? And this is what the Lord told him. The sages saw the celebration of Hanukkah, as it would become, alluded to even in the Torah. There's a hint of it in the Torah. Leviticus chapter 23, the very last verse in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 44, and the first two verses in the next chapter, verses 1 and 2. If you read them together, it has something very interesting to say. And you got to remember, in the Torah scrolls, there is no chapter division. Okay, there are no chapter divisions. There are no verse numbers. There are no periods, commas, nothing. You have some space and you have paragraph breaks, and that's it. Okay, and so this would naturally be read together and flow together if you wanted to take this section out, okay, and read it just like this. So, beginning in Leviticus 23:44, thus Moses declared to the people of Israel the appointed feasts of the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the people of Israel to bring you pure oil from beaten olives for the lamp, that a light may be kept burning regularly." Okay? So that the feasts of the Lord, in a sense, almost begin with this lighting of the menorah. So there's a little connection here. It has always been the Lord's desire that the light of holiness and godliness be kindled to repel the dark forces of this fallen world. Is Hanukkah about the military victories of the Jewish people over their oppressors? Or is it about the miracle of the oil? The Jewish answer is yes. Yes. Hanukkah commemorates and celebrates the victory of light over darkness, the exaltation of the humble over the proud, the triumph of holiness and spiritual identity over assimilation. Hanukkah is a call to spiritually reconnect and shine our light in this dark, dark world. But how do we do this? That's the topic of our next session.